This is Mac OS Ken.
Ben Bajarin talks fallout from
Ragnarok.
It is Wednesday, the 5th of August, 2026. I'm Ken Ray, and this is a special edition of Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by OneSkin, a new standard for your skin. Try it now with 15% off using code MacOSKen at oneskin.co/MacOSKen. We have heard for months about the memory crisis. Seriously, wasn't until Apple's earnings call last week, though, that I was like, oh, you mean crisis. It's kind of a slap in the face that made me want to talk to somebody for perspective, so we'll do that with Ben Bajarin in a moment. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Helix Sleep, making premium mattresses and bedding that are customized to fit your personal needs. With over 20 unique mattresses to choose from, how are you supposed to choose? You're not. I mean, you are, but Helix Sleep is there to help. Before they sent me my mattress, they asked me so many questions for a really good reason. They want to make sure the mattresses they send are right for the people they send them to. They offer soft, medium, and firm mattresses, as well as different options for side, stomach, or back sleepers. Never would have occurred to me that that mattered. Bottom line, Helix Sleep has a mattress for just about everybody and stuff to go with them. Bed frames, pillows, duvets. If it's part of your sleep, there's a good chance Helix Sleep has it. Go to helixsleep.com/MacOSKen for 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/MacOSKen for 20% off site-wide. Did I mention the free delivery right to your door? Yeah, you get that too. HELIX. Get savings of 20% off site-wide at helixsleep.com/MacOSKen. If you don't mind a tiny bit of advice from me, reach out to people who impress you. Seriously, reach out to people who impress you. One night in the mid-2000s, what are we calling that time? The aughts, I suppose. Anyway, one night way back then, I read an essay by a guy that I found really impressive. That guy was Tim Bajarin, then principal analyst and head of creative strategies. And he amazed me by writing back. That led to ongoing conversation, which led to me asking him to be on my podcast, which led to me booking him on the TV show I was producing at the time. When his son Ben went to work for Creative Strategies, I booked him on the TV show and asked him to be on my podcast. And here we are, roughly 20 years later. Ben Bajarin has always impressed me, both with his knowledge and his generosity. So when I freaked out over the weekend and said, "Will you be on my show?" he said, "Sure." Reach out to people who impress you. Anyway, here's my conversation with Ben Bajarin. I come to you today as somebody whose eyes have been opened to how closed my eyes have been. For a few quarters now, we've heard from the likes of Omdia and Counterpoint that the memory thing was going to get bad, but I'm feeling like maybe it's bad. You know, like they say in that werewolf movie that I think nobody saw. So what I want to do is go over some of the stuff that we've heard going into now about low-end, mid-range, high-end on smartphones. Before we get to the smartphone players, though, can you just, 30 seconds or less, tell me why there is no more memory to be had?
Yeah, I mean, it might take longer than 30 seconds, but let me just give it.
No, 30 seconds is what you got, my friend. You're
Thanks.
a professional.
Okay,
you can do it.
I will keep it tight. So the bottom line is memory has typically been what we would define a high clean room reuse environment, meaning that they would just build their shells and their fabs. And every time they move to a new process node, they largely would just take out the old equipment and put in new equipment. So there is a fixed amount of clean room space that has capacity, and that has not changed in quite some time. And you are now up against a dynamic where the demand for that is so drastic that they are having to build new facilities in clean room space that they did not have. Therefore, the main point is we have just been seriously limited in the amount of annual memory that we can just produce. And that is a finite number. That is not a dynamic number. And we are up against that wall.
Okay, I feel like I should ask you whether it is silly, the amount of memory that's actually being demanded at this point, but now I feel like this is a good tease. So please, after the break, remind me to ask you whether the amount that's being demanded is silly.
Okay.
All right. Let's do the smartphone thing, though, because that's what we started with.
Okay.
According to the likes of Omdia and Counterpoint, players on the low end of the smartphone food chain, we're talking about smartphones at about $200 or less. Market trackers like the ones that I mentioned have indicated that those might go away, or at the very least, those companies might get out of the low-end smartphone. I guess the two questions are, is that going to happen, or has that happened already?
We haven't seen evidence it's happened already. We have seen some portfolio rebalancing, which I guess sort of gets to your point about they're prioritizing the entry level less, and they're moving upstream. Again, areas where they might have some price elasticity. But the challenge is, like, it's just margins. Like, a lot of the low end players, a lot of the Chinese smartphone makers didn't have good margins to begin with. And that's with the phones that they try to price at somewhat of a premium. They have a very hard time moving up market. And that is creating a lot of downward pressure on a lot of these companies who are, drastically downsizing their volumes for global smartphones, but in a certain, price tier. But at the same time, having a very, very hard time making money. So they are in a financial crisis, if not necessarily a pure volume crisis, because they just did not have the margins to give to absorb the price that they need to keep a competitive edge in pricing.
So then talk to me, if you could, about what happens to those people, those consumers. Are you looking for like a sudden uptick in the used market, or are you looking at people who, I'm old enough to get a smartphone, too bad there aren't any?
Yeah, I mean, we think that the price increase is going to have an impact on the market. So people either delay their purchase, don't purchase something else, right? Because they find it to have more value. The market right now, again, depending on whose estimates, could be anywhere between 12% to 18% off for the year, not getting better, which is pretty bad in general. Like, smartphones don't typically take that type of a hit because, again, they've got so much price in their range of prices. So I think the main thing we're looking for is pockets of the market seem to be okay. Premium seems to be okay. The rest of the market, people are just going to hold off. Like, we're not again seeing stuff in secondary. It just sounds like they're delaying those purchases. And again, because people just aren't going to buy a entry level smartphone at the price you could get like a quasi premium for. So the dynamics are changing right now.
Yeah, I think you might have actually addressed this a tiny bit, but what I have down to talk about, and I just want to make sure we cover it, the next tier in the range, I guess, for mid-range players, say you're $300, maybe $400 or $500. The thinking was that they would either trim their offerings, like kill the low end, or maybe on the other side, sort of feature themselves up into the premium space. I saw one thing that was kind of weird because they were like, well, yeah, this phone used to be like $500, but because of memory cost, now it's $600. And suddenly that is seen as a premium phone. And I'm like, well, it's the same phone. It's just priced like a premium phone at that point. Do you get to sort of like sneak under the rope and say, hey, we're premium now? Or if you have a company that actually does go ahead and say, hey, we've got a better camera, hey, we've got a, I don't know, glossier finish or whatever, because they can now charge $200 for a phone that was almost the same as what they used to charge. I mean, $200 more, excuse me, for a phone that was pretty much what they used to make. I mean, do you suddenly fool people into thinking XYZ phone, because I don't want to name any name, but do you suddenly fool people into thinking, well, this phone is actually a better phone now because I'm paying more for it?
Not in general, because that market typically tends to be, as we would define, a value for the money environment. So they have a way in which they would factor, right, performance, screen size, screen quality, camera, all of those things as being value for the money. And so the second that something that was a down spec'd product is now competing with some of these things that changes the equation for value for money. I think that's where the challenge is, which is again why we see all these vendors essentially mix shifting to just a couple of hero products that they're just going to lean on.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be how they're going to ride this out. So instead of the breadth of depth of portfolio, they're consolidating to a handful of things, kind of entrenching in a handful of price points, and hoping that they can just ride that out and compete. So that's how we see them addressing kind of this dynamic, because you're absolutely right. Like a $300 phone doesn't all of a sudden become a 400 phone or a 400 phone at 500 and compete with something that's actually got better specs, even if it didn't have to increase its price. So they're just retrenching now on SKUs.
And then predictions for the high end, and here I'll name names. I think we're talking Samsung, Huawei, and Apple pretty much. Predictions for these have been for those players to pick up market share, but I'm thinking that's not because more people are buying them. Because honestly, when this whole thing started, my thinking was, well, mid-price phones are going to be priced like high-end phones, so you might have people holding on for a bit and then plunking down more money than they might have wanted to originally to get a better phone, right? I'm not going to get Mr. Right Now phone. I'm going to get Mr. Right phone. But
Sure.
Now I'm starting to think it's actually just, really the prices on all of those are going to go up. Only the well-heeled are going to be able to afford them. And so their market share goes up because the people who can afford to buy those phones are still buying those phones, whereas people, further down the iPhone or the smartphone food chain, as you say, they're just delaying purchases. I mean, does market share go up for your top players because more people are buying the top players, or because the only people who can afford to buy phones are buying at the top?
Yeah, I mean, there's a mix of both. I also think it's relevant, just on the back of Apple's news last week around the leasing program.
Mm-hmm.
That in general you have two things. So one, China had historically not had a leasing program, right? Most people just had to buy those phones like on spec at full price, and I think most people would know, right? Apple's phones were quite a bit more expensive than others, largely because of the import, fee into China. Now that China is keeping, and most carriers are doing these leasing plans, that softens some of this blow, because again, right, if you're just going to raise memory prices $50 or even 100 spread out over 3 years, that's not too bad. So we're seeing leasing plans change this, but again, leasing plans are only valid in kind of premium devices, right? So it's isolated to a handful in every market, which sort of just backs up exactly what you're saying, which is we already know a lot of consumers globally are moving to these leasing plans, and therefore it's going to keep you tied to premium. Where share gains go, that's a little bit trickier, just in terms of who has what SKU at what price and where. But these leasing plans do kind of level the playing field. But to be honest with you, I think that tends to consolidate itself to more premium brands, which gives Apple an advantage, Samsung as well, to a degree in many markets, particularly Europe. But then Huawei stays pretty strong and is able to move upstream in China primarily.
I don't know if you want to get into pricing. I saw an article the other day. I guess there was a rumor out there that the price of the iPhone 18 Pro might go as high as $1,399 to start. So instead of $1,099 for the iPhone 17 Pro, iPhone 18 Pro might start at $1,399. And the article that I saw said that's too much of a jump even for Apple, even for the Pro end of the iPhone line. For a starting price, you've gone too far at that point. I'm going to Vegas. You're not. But do you want to gamble? I mean, what is your take on an article like that? Because I went into, okay, Apple might have to raise prices on iPhone, and iPad, excuse me. And yeah, they might have to raise prices on the Mac, but that MacBook Neo is just such a great thing. And then, having just introduced it at an amazing price, still a good price for the device, but I mean, they had no problem. I shouldn't say they had no problem because I wasn't in the room, but they raised the price of that $100. The idea that there is a price too high for the iPhone Pro in these times is a $300 jump, too high a jump for them to take.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's two things. I think we are in a very precarious position for Apple, for all the device OEMs, and I say that because everybody in devices, particularly Apple, who has largely for the the vast majority of their entity's life had supply chain leverage, is no longer the case. So when you just don't have supply chain leverage anymore, you either have to do two things. You either have to agree to your capacity, which you need, right, which Apple does just an unprecedented amount of capacity in LPDDR and DRAM and stuff like that. And so they're up against basically bidding wars for the amount of volume they need in order to make the devices that they need. And so in this environment, there's a good chance that they are having to agree to a premium price, which they've never had to do, just in order to get the capacity that they need. And so I could see that having an outsized impact. Now, is it $300? I don't know. I do think Apple is, undoubtedly preparing people for price increases, which again, the leasing programs will help offset some of that burden. But Apple's never been in this position before, to just not have any supply chain leverage and be in a position where the supply chain knows how much scale they need and are going to ask them to do unorthodox things in order to get that scale, because of how much demand there is for memory in the supply chain and lack of capacity, again, is the other thing. They're going to have to say, I'll give this to you, Apple, but that means I'm not giving it to somebody else. How much is that worth for you for your 230 million iPhones you're going to ship?
More with Ben in a moment, but first a word from today's sponsor, OneSkin, a new standard for your skin. The scientists behind OneSkin spent 5 years developing their OS1 peptide. It targets cellular senescence, zombie cells they call them. OS1 switches off the damaged cells that contribute to lines, wrinkles, and sagging skin. It's not just about looks, though. It's about enhancing how skin functions so it stays healthier and more resilient. Their OS1 body has made my skin feel softer to the touch, while OS1 face has done that as well and taken care of some dry patches that I've struggled with for years. See what they can do for you at oneskin.co/macOScan. With over a decade of research behind it, OneSkin's OS1 peptide is proven to target the visible signs of aging, helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. For a limited time, try OneSkin with 15% off using code MacOSCan at oneskin.co/macOScan. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code MacOSCan. When they ask where you heard about them, please let them know it was MacOSCan. Try OneSkin now with 15% off using code MacOSCan at oneskin.co/macOSCan. Well, if I was willing to pay for licensed music, we'd come back with Good Day Sunshine. Ben Bajarin is with us today, everybody. He is the CEO and principal analyst at Creative Strategies. I asked you not to let me forget a question about whether it is crazy the amount of memory that's being demanded, but I had another question before that. I've known you and Tim It's kind of weird. Over 20 years now. So I have an idea of what Creative Strategies does. But for people who don't, let them know what Creative Strategies is and what you guys do.
Yeah, so we are a market research firm, sort of founded and headquartered in Silicon Valley. We now have people across the United States and a couple folks in Europe. I know we primarily cover every market that there is, so that's obviously phones and devices, as you and I have talked about forever, but enterprise software, security, compute, semiconductors, all the things that go into the underlying compute supply chain. Obviously, in this moment, a whole lot of AI in frontier lab work, all the way down to the hyperscaler. So we and our analysts just spend a bunch of time talking to management executives on the boots on the ground, doing research on all these categories, researching on all these categories, and trying to just make sense of all the stuff that's out there and make it relevant to different audiences in our analysis.
And as you hear, Mr. Bajarin here, neck deep in all of it. He's not just bossing analysts around. I mean, he is doing that. I'm sorry. I suspect you're actually a wonderful person for whom to work. All right, we focused on smartphones in the first segment because that's been the focus in consumer electronics for well over a decade. And as you say, that tends to be the thing that you and I talk about, although, we've covered quite a bit over the past far too many years to count. Should we talk about other segments in consumer electronics, or should we move out of consumer electronics? Because over the weekend, I started to wonder whether it was myopic to only worry about tech. Now, of course, everything is tech, but there was a piece that I saw in the Washington Post that had a trade industry spokesman for, I want to say, routers and cable boxes or something, saying that the lack of chips could stymie availability, growth, and innovation in fields like automobiles, which of course we saw that happen, I guess, with the chip shortage in 22, 23. Also said medical devices. And as I say, I know tech is everywhere, but this isn't just, can I get the iPad I want? Can I get the game console that I want at this point? Or is it? I mean, are we right to just keep focusing on consumer electronics and the rest is going to sort? Or I'm kind of worried that this is actually much bigger than any of us have realized to this point.
Yes, this is a COVID-like moment in the chip shortage for kind of across the board, but on a scale that we've just never seen
Mm-hmm.
in the industry. So yeah, it's impacting everybody. It doesn't sound like it's going to get any better. It doesn't mean that people aren't able to get what they need. It just means that they're not able to get what they need at the capacity in which they are used to getting it. And so, vendors, like you said, game consoles, medical equipment, automotive, etc., they will get stuff they need to sell. They're just not going to get nearly as many as they were. So we're just going to be in an environment where it's likely that demand outstrips supply, and people just have a lead time of their ability to get products in market as they can secure the critical parts of the supply chain that they need. So it's kind of across the board. I mean, it's even worse than I've ever seen when people start telling me that we need to worry about organic substrates and actual chip wafer production,
Mm-hmm.
even things all the way down to capacitive transistors, which I really can't tell you a time where I've been like, yo, we're out of capacitive transistors of all different varying sizes for power management. Like this is like nothing the industry has ever seen before. And so yes, it's got shockwaves throughout everybody who needs electrical components, analog included.
Okay, so then the next question I'm going to ask you is stupid, but I'm going to ask it just so I'm clear. I mean, we had the problem in 22, 23 where I want to say car makers couldn't get the 14 nanometer or 7 nanometer chips that they needed to run the air conditioning in the back seat. But that wasn't just about demand. That was also about, I mean, that was still ripples from COVID and from, manufacturing processes at that point. Are we looking at the same kind of thing here where, because Tim Cook leaned hard on it is the advanced nodes that are giving us the trouble for the iPhone and the Mac and the iPad. Are you talking about legacy nodes as well?
Yep. Legacy nodes, again, which translates itself over to what's going on in analog.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, batteries like lithium ion, because people are building a bunch of batteries to go be backup power for their data centers. So it's pretty bad. Like I, just to give you a broad perspective, like we've started doing this thing where we're just trying to track, and I'm sorry for this buzzword term, but we're just trying to track the constraints
Hmm.
in the industry. And we're at a constraint map now that's like 42 components deep. So it's like thematically, we cannot find anything that you need in a supply chain where somebody is sitting on any level of abundance.
I am both gratified and horrified to hear you mention COVID, because I actually wrote an essay that I'm not sure if I'm going to put it out or not, because it just ends in kind of a depressing way. And I thought, well, I'll talk to Ben.
Hmm.
By the way, after this, it's Mr. Blue Sky. So stay tuned for that. Where I was like, the only things that I can think of that have looked from the outside, and I'm on the outside, obviously, that have looked like this are the 2008 financial crisis and COVID.
Yep.
Is that overstating it, or am I going to be sick?
No, I mean, I think you're right in terms of both the buildup and the environment that went into creating kind of those situations. Um, but again, I'd say like this is at a structural level, unlike something that this industry has just completely caught off guard by, and because it goes so deep, it's really affecting kind of everybody in their overall ability to get critical components across the board. So um, it's similar in what's the lead up to. It's different in the depth of how deep this goes in the supply chain.
When I was getting ready to talk to you, because I mentioned 2022, 2023, but again, there was a lot going into that. The only thing that I could think of in technology that sounded familiar at all was the sort of glut shortage cycle for NAND flash. Again, going back maybe a decade.
Hmm.
Is that instructive here, or since NAND pretty much does one thing while processors do everything? I mean, are we talking about something completely different here, or is there something instructive in that?
It's a little bit of both. What made the memory industry, just kind of when you say the dynamic you said, glut, right, is the technical term is digestion periods. So you build up, then people buy a bunch of your capacity, they stick it on the shelf, and then they wait until they ship product, right? So you got to just go through inventory, and that was the cycle around memory. To some degree, this happens with logic and CPUs, but not today. But the difference is twofold. So if you're a device maker, like you work on just largely, the term is pin compatibility, right? I can use any number of memory suppliers. I can buy it up in bulk and I can set it on my shelves and I can slot it into my devices and it's going to work fine. It's a standardized industry. That still exists, obviously, in consumer electronics. What's changed is you have all of this other memory that is more like logic because it is co-designed onto the processor. So HBM is that, and you're seeing a little bit of variance there within DRAM and some of those components that are being attached to CPUs in DDR or LPDDR. That's not necessarily just pin compliant, but built onto the actual chip. And so that is far less cyclical because it's again not just inventory sitting on shelf. You have to design it, you have to qualify it. It has to pass verification and work with your logic because it is packaged on die.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're seeing a huge difference now because memory is not just a incompatible industry anymore. It is becoming more designed in and strategic to logic for AI accelerators. And so that is creating a whole lot more balance, but it's also creating a lot more of this chaos because wafers for like around HBM and even what you're seeing around different types of LPDR and DRAM are much larger. And so therefore they're just taking up more of the available wafers, and again, our limited capacity, and then meaning that those that exist for pin compatible is just far less capacity. And because they're cheaper, right? The memory OEMs are focusing on what's high margin, which is more of HBM and strategic parts of memory tied to logic. They're getting more money for that. So it makes sense that they put more wafers to that. And then that just comes at the expense of everybody who wanted to use kind of the standardized products for memory, which is Apple and all the consumer electronics guys. So it's different with some similar dynamics, but very different in that just the demand profile across the board for memory, and those wafers is at a completely different environment that's just not going to allow anybody to get anything and hold it in inventory, which means we're a long way off from any digestion period cycle in memory at all.
Now, I know I'm going to oversimplify this, but I do that because that's how I understand it. A lot of what's happening in memory right now is not, we're in a booming economy, so people are buying more smartphones than ever before. They're buying 3, they're, hiding them different places around the house, whatever. As I understand it, the problem with memory right now, or the issue with memory availability right now, is you have AI data centers and AI powerhouses basically trying to power the models that are going to make their AI the AI. And again, I know that's way oversimplification. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, first of all, and then let's get to the question that I teased, I think, when we started talking a few minutes ago. Is it crazy the amount of memory that is being demanded at this point?
Oversimplification, it works. I think the difference here is like, this is one of those times where memory, in this case, like actually means what its term right dignifies, which is that the more memory you have in an AI accelerator, whether that's a GPU or an ASIC, the more it can remember about your context, about your conversation. Therefore, the better the AI is. And so it's sort of like, yeah, throw a whole lot more onto that because it's going to mean that your AI gets better. It's got more context. It can handle more conversations in that context window, thus making your AI that much more smarter or able to remember a whole lot more of things about the tasks that you're doing or whatnot, right? So that's the up and to the right curve, and that memory is actually playing a defining role in that it's helping give AI memory. So you can see why that demand profile changes. The more memory it gets, the better your AI gets at any number of top tasks that you get at it. So that's a linear line. Again, the dynamic I went back to is that this is just these wafers to do HBM is so big that it makes sense why, when it becomes strategic to the quality of the output of your AI, that they would commit more of their wafers to that sort of a thing, because it is giving them more money, kind of creates this broad right dynamic that we're at. So if you believe that AI is a transformational technology,
Right.
and that we are on a curve to make it so much better that everybody gets value from it, everybody plus businesses is willing to maybe use it so much that we can monetize the insane amount of capex that's going into this, then no, the memory demand makes a ton of sense, because it's directly correlated with the progress of a transformational, possibly generational technology.
If you believe that.
If you believe that.
Okay.
If you don't, then everybody's insane, and we're spending a lot of money making something that's not going to be as useful to society as those on the flip side of the coin would be.
Everybody's insane but me, says he, putting on his Napoleon hat and sticking his hand inside his shirt. Right. I got to tell you, man, I always count myself lucky to be able to speak with you. Can you let people know, please, I don't know, podcasts, socials, whatever, if you wanted to send people the Ben Bajarin way, which way would you send them?
Yeah, so a couple things. Obviously, I am on Twitter/X. I still call it Twitter because it should be Twitter, at Ben Bajarin. We actually have a publishing outlet now called The Diligence Stack, where a lot of our research gets published into much formal reports and articles, and will evolve, broadly around the creativestrategies.com domain for far amount more of information and research that people can get both publicly and privately for a handful of our clients. So those are the main channels. But like I said, Twitter's the easiest. I publish everything on Twitter. You'll see everything we do there. But the publishing front end for our firm is new, and that's at the diligencestack.com.
Even when it's not a pleasure, it is always a pleasure. Ben Bajarin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Taking a different turn tomorrow, longtime friend Jeff Gamet had a bone to pick over the weekend with people who had a bone to pick with the Apple upgrade program. People like me. And we'll kick that around on tomorrow's show. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and sponsored by Helix Sleep. Get 20% off site-wide at helixsleep.com/macOSKen. This show is also sponsored by OneSkin, a new standard for your skin. Try it now with 15% off using code macOSKen at oneskin.co/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can find me on Mastodon, macOSKen at mastodon.social. You can also send me an email, info@macOSKen.com. Until next time, that will do this special edition of macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
It's still sunny.